Hello and welcome to ATP Insights, where we cover the most important tech news in Asia. Today is Monday, the 6th of April, 2026. Let's get right to it. We're going to talk about China's domestic AI stack and any progress that it's making there. And then later in the program, we'll be joined by Vijay KB, the CEO and co-founder at HumbleCode, to explore how technology leaders are thinking about AI infrastructure and the practical challenges of integrating these systems into real-world operations, followed by Ajay Gopal, founder and CEO at Jazz with just one Z, to discuss how technology companies are navigating AI adoption and what practical use cases are emerging. Okay, look, China's domestic AI stack is becoming formidable. It's becoming one of the most important technology stories in Asia right now, and arguably one of the most important technology stories in the world. And I think the thing that makes this significant is not just that Chinese companies are buying more Chinese chips. That was always going to happen. It's that the pieces are starting to connect: domestic models, domestic accelerators, domestic cloud infrastructure, which has been there for a while, domestic software adoption and adaptation, and a state-backed industrial push that is making the whole system more coherent, more cohesive, and accelerating faster, I think, than most external people actually expected. Reuters reported this week that Zippu's 2025 revenue rose 132% as it accelerated its move towards domestic chips while its losses widened. But again, if you go back and look at the EV example in China, which we've been discussing for weeks as well, Chinese companies and the Chinese government is willing to allow actually some of these technology companies, and I would submit to you that these EV companies are also considered tech companies. I mean, that's, I think, a given. They're allowed to take losses, and they can take losses for a while. This is what happens when a country actually has an industrial policy and an industrial strategy that's more than 4.5 seconds long. Reuters also reported that Huawei's newer AI chips are attracting buyers, including ByteDance and Alibaba, which is interesting, right? Because those were two of the companies that were mentioned when NVIDIA wanted to get past some of the import restrictions or export restrictions from the United States to sell their most powerful chips to China. So the fact that Alibaba and ByteDance are buying stuff from Huawei, it could be even more significant than it looks on the surface, right? And Chinese GPU and AI chip vendors captured about 41% of China's AI accelerator server market in 2025, shrinking NVIDIA share to 55%, which again, it's a big number. But the important thing here is the direction. Directionally, this is not looking great for NVIDIA. Huawei's own annual report says its Cloud Matrix AI infrastructure and AI cluster service are expanding, with more than 1,800 customers worldwide by the end of 25. And that combination matters, right? Because it suggests that China is no longer trying to solve one single bottleneck. It's trying to localize the whole stack. And again, this is important, right? Because China actually does have what appears to me, and you have to understand, like, I have been living in Asia since February of 1990. I have been following the China growth story since before most of you were born. What they do is they take a really long-term view. To be fair, the first time I went to China, I think it was 1991, the whole country wasn't even electrified yet. Pudong, so across the Bund, didn't even exist. When China has a plan, they execute that plan. It may cost them more money than they expect. It may take more time than they expect. But when they have a plan, they barrel through and they get that plan done. And right now, their plan is to localize the entire artificial intelligence stack, the whole stack, not just the chips, right? So let's dig a little bit deeper here. We have to ask ourselves this question, right? Is China simply replacing foreign chips? Or is it building a generally domestic AI stack? And again, I've said this, but I just want to dig a little bit deeper here. Because the answer increasingly looks like, yes, they're trying to build the whole thing. Zippu, which is a Chinese company, is a useful example because its story is not just about compute substitution. It's not. Reuters says the company is moving more aggressively onto domestic chips and claims it has achieved performance efficiencies on those systems that are comparable to leading global chips through deep optimization of its GL5 model, right? So there's more than one way to skin this cat, no pun intended. And the point here is that even if the chips are only 80% or 75% of the power of an NVIDIA chip, there are other things you can do from a software optimization and a model optimization standpoint that makes the chips good enough, okay? And that's important Because once a model developer starts rewriting code, tuning the architectures of the model, and adjusting deployment of logic around local hardware, once it figures out how to integrate that together, the chip then no longer becomes just a substitute part. It becomes now part of an ecosystem. And the same pattern appears in reporting around DeepSeek. This is the company that kind of came out of nowhere, said they were spending millions of dollars to build their stuff as opposed to billions of dollars that OpenAI and Anthropic are spending to build theirs. Reuters, again, citing the information, says DeepSeek's coming new model, the V4 model, is expected to run on Huawei chips, and then Chinese firms, including Alibaba, ByteDance, and Tencent, again, another one of the companies mentioned in the story we did about NVIDIA a couple of weeks ago, have placed large orders for Huawei's new processors. Reuters also reports that DeepSeek has worked with Huawei and Cambricon to rewrite parts of the model code for domestic hardware. This is really, really important. This is what stack formation looks like in practice. This is what it looks like when you have a plan. Chips, changing the code inside the model, software tooling, so building the tools that are going to be necessary to actually build the models and design the chips. The cloud stuff has been in place for a while, and procurement behavior all moving in the same direction. Remember, I said this before. The directionality is the thing that matters almost more than anything else. Standing still, not an option. Going backwards, not even on the board. This broader framing is also supported by longer horizon research. Merrick's argues that China's goal is self-reliance at every level of AI technology, from chips to models to software frameworks, while Rand describes Beijing's industrial policy as one built around subsidized compute. Again, back to subsidization, right? Talent, applications, and system-level support rather than just like one-off hardware products, rather than just going out and saying, we need better chips. They're not doing that. Again, if your government actually has a valid and useful industrial policy and has a history of having really important industrial policies that have played out, that have actually worked, there are more high-speed trains in Shanghai than there are in all of the United States. Think about that for a second. When China puts its mind to building something technologically advanced, they go and they do it. A recent U.S.-China economic and Security Review Commission bulletin makes the same basic point, using the phrase localizing the stack. In other words, the story is not just that China wants a domestic GPU. I mean, that's true. They do want a domestic GPU, but they want more than that. It wants a sanction-resistant AI production system. They just don't want to rely on other countries. You can read other countries as the United States. They don't want to rely on other countries for anything that's AI related, and frankly, for anything that's anything related. And historically, China has been really good at again, committing to something, building that thing, and actually coming out on top. Whether it's a high-speed train, the local roadway systems are actually pretty incredible. China continues to build highways, and connect the country both physically and digitally, right? And I mean, the EV story we've already talked about. They committed to being the best in the world in electric vehicles, and they are. Okay, we have to consider how much of this shift is being driven by export controls and how much is real progress in China as well. Look, in my mind, I think the answer is actually kind of both. And export controls have kind of been the, what do you want to call it? Like the forcing mechanism. So if they could freely buy, this is the dumb thing, right? If they could have freely bought NVIDIA chips, maybe they wouldn't have spent so much time and money building their own. So if it was just a software race, it was just a model race, that would have been fine. But then again, that didn't happen. So NVIDIA itself says in its latest 10K report that export controls have disrupted demand, encouraged customers to design out U.S. semiconductors from all of their infrastructure, right? And increased investment in foreign competitors. The filing goes further. This is NVIDIA's filing, yeah? NVIDIA says that by the end of fiscal 2026, it was effectively foreclosed from competing in China's data center compute market under current rules. It'll be just like locked out. And that this lost opportunity helped competitors build larger customer and develop ecosystems. NVIDIA also disclosed a $4.5 billion charge tied to H20 excess inventory, right? They built more chips than they can sell on the H20 side. Yeah, not the H200s, I think, which is the more powerful chip. And purchase obligations after new U.S. licensing requirements in April 2025. And that is a striking admission that they have too many of these chips. It means that the market distortion is not theoretical. It's already reshaping both consumer behavior, customer behavior, and the economics of product planning. But I think at some level, it would be way too simple to say China is advancing only because Washington pushed it there. It didn't hurt, for sure. But there is now clear evidence of real internal progress. There is reporting that Huawei's 950 PR chip is drawing interest because it's better optimized for inference. There's that word again. And easier for developers to migrate toward from NVIDIA's CUDA-centered world, right? CUDA is what's the right way to say this? It's the software around the chip that people use to actually talk to the chip, right? Huawei's own annual report shows how much money the company is still throwing at the problem. Huawei is a very successful company. They're going to throw a ton of money at this. 192 billion won in R&D in 2025. That's equal to roughly 22% of revenue. It's a big number. Zhipu's revenue growth, especially in on-premise deployment of APIs, also suggests domestic demand is real and commercial rather than merely political. So it's not like the government is out there paying for all this stuff. The government could be encouraging these companies to do it, but ByteDance, right, Tencent, and other big companies are saying they want these chips, okay, and they want to buy them. And Reuters reported separately that China's venture funding is surging again with state-led money. Again, these are the subsidies we talked about, right? State-led money flowing aggressively into strategic sectors, including artificial intelligence. I mean, it just makes sense, right? Again, when you live in a country that has a real long-term view and has a proper industrial policy that's focused actually on making progress, it's pretty incredible what you can accomplish. So the more precise interpretation here is this. Export controls may have accelerated the timeline for China to build its own AI stack, but Chinese firms are now responding with product, capital, and engineering work that appears to be substantive. I mean, China does not lack for engineering talent. And the government, if the government subsidizes anything here, they're going to subsidize the highest part of technology. Again, just like they did in the EV space. None of this should be surprising. Now, investors should be asking themselves questions as well. Even if Chinese chips are still trail NVIDIA, can domestic players still win on economics, scale, and deployment? And I think the answer is yes. Again, when incentives are aligned properly, both from a customer standpoint, from a producer standpoint, and from a government subsidy standpoint, stuff just comes together. Things coalesce. Oh, there's that word. China's domestic AI stack is coalescing. And the reason is not that all AI demand requires absolute frontier performance. It just doesn't, right? Reuters reporting on Huawei's newer chips points out that the 950 PR is aimed specifically and especially at inference. And inference is where most of the market is going. Training giant frontier models remains a prestige and capability race, for sure. But the commercial value increasingly comes from serving models, running agents, deploying industry applications, and supporting enterprise workloads at lower cost. This is something the Chinese have historically been great at doing, all of those things. And if Chinese chips are good enough, available at scale, politically favored, and increasingly supported by software rewrites, getting away from CUDA, yeah, but also improving the models as well, tweaking the models so that they are integrated much more closely with the chip itself. Trying to get that hardware-software integration is super important, right? If that's the case, then these chips don't need to beat NVIDIA everywhere. As a matter of fact, they don't need to beat NVIDIA in almost all places. They only need to become default choice in enough domestic workloads. And to be fair, this is true in every market. And it's true in every product. The first chips that Huawei built were in no way, shape, or form even close to what NVIDIA was producing. But the more they sell, the more R&D money they spend on this, the more engineering talent they hire and they employ and deploy to build these chips and to do the research, right? The better these chips are going to get, at some point there's going to be parity. Sure, NVIDIA may be a few years ahead here and there, but there's going to be parity. And this is why the market share numbers matter, right? Reuters says Chinese vendors, captured 41% of Chinese AI accelerator server market in 2025, with Huawei alone shipping 812,000 chips. NVIDIA still led with 55%, but that is down sharply from the overwhelming dominance it previously enjoyed. And CSIS notes that TrendForce expects domestic share in China's AI chip market to rise to 50% this year. This year. And in policy pressure, local procurement preferences, right? I'm a Chinese company. I want to buy from another Chinese company. Makes sense to me, right? And the possibility that foreign chips remain constrained or even just politically disfavored, the economics start to tilt towards good enough, plus I got them in my hand, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush kind of thing, rather than best in class, but I don't know when I'm going to be able to get them, right? So sure, NVIDIA makes the best chips, but can I buy them? Can I even buy the second best chips that NVIDIA makes? Apparently not. And that is often how industrial substitution really happens, right? We talk about this all the time. If I can't get the thing that I need, I can get the thing that's available. And the more I buy that thing that's available, the better that company is going to become at making the thing that I need. Just think about it in those terms. Whatever starts off as second best, but supported second best at scale can become the market standard. This is the point, right? And that's still true. There are still limits here. Chinese industry executives themselves will tell you right to your face that the country remains 5 to 10 years behind in AI data center chips in some areas, according to reports from Semicon China coverage. Merrick's also notes that Huawei's CAN software stack, this would be the thing that competes with CUDA, right, is less mature than CUDA. And that portability across generations remains a challenge, right? So if you build a new chip, you probably have to build a whole, not all of CAN has to be rewritten, but you're definitely going to have to add stuff to it because those new chips are going to have new, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word I'm looking for, Michael? Come on, words are your thing. New capabilities. I got it. They're going to have new capabilities, and to support those new capabilities, the tools that support those chips are going to have to include the software that's going to run those new capabilities, right? So China has not won this game yet. It's not like a 100% clean victory story yet, but this is a story about Chinese resilience. And while China may still trail at the frontier, which is perfectly fine, right? Remember, we said earlier in this segment that the frontier is kind of where all the cachet is, right? That's where all the prestige is. But most of the operations that are happening here are supporting agentic AI and also inference. You don't have to have like the best frontier model to run inference. Okay? China can still build a large domestic market around acceptable performance, good enough, and it can keep improving through deployment. And deployment is what creates data, tuning, user habits, and developer loyalty, right? Like the more people buy Huawei chips, the more likely they are to buy Huawei chips. The more likely they are to buy stuff from Zhipu. Like all these things matter. And then what's going to happen to NVIDIA's market share? It's going to keep going down. That's what's going to keep going down. So again, we just have to ask ourselves, what does a more self-contained Chinese AI ecosystem mean for NVIDIA, for US AI leadership, and for the rest of Asia? And I would just point to the EV markets, the electric vehicle and the HEVs, the hybrid electric vehicle markets, right? You know, like how many Peugeot EVs are sold in China? Probably not nearly as many as BYD. Same thing for Tesla. So what does this mean for NVIDIA? And for the rest of the world, actually. For NVIDIA, it probably means that if the company remains the global gold standard, China is no longer a market that can assume will snap back in the old way. I mean, once you stop selling there and they start getting used to somebody else's chips, and they're working well enough, they're not going to go back and buy NVIDIA stuff. They'll figure stuff out. That's why we said a story of resilience, not of clean victory, right? NVIDIA says directly that export controls have encouraged customers and governments to buy from competitors and design out U.S. chips. Right, so just from their stack, they're just going, we're not going to use these chips. We're just going to replace them with these. And everything that we design is going to be around these new chips that we have. We're going to leave out these U.S. chips. And that includes NVIDIA, right? And once those design decisions are embedded, they don't reverse easily. They're pretty sticky. They're probably going to stay there. A domestic ecosystem can persist, even if some foreign supply becomes available later. And this would be typical of a government that doesn't have an industrial plan, that doesn't understand like what it really means to do international trade. Flip-flopping. Okay, now you can buy the NVIDIA chips. Well, we already built our own. So why would we want to go out and buy your NVIDIA chips? Soz. We already fixed that problem because you were too short-sighted or maybe too afraid. So we built our own stuff. And for the US, the implication is more complicated than controls are working or controls are failing. In a lot of cases, the world is not that black and white. It's not that binary. They are clearly constraining China's access to top-end US hardware, but they are also, by NVIDIA's own account and by multiple outside analyses, coordinating demand towards Chinese alternatives and helping local ecosystems scale faster. This is one of the downsides of having export controls. You can't say that the AI chips are not like military grade, because at some point you even see some governments trying to incorporate the artificial intelligence stuff into the military weapon systems. So sure, there should be some understanding or some control around who gets to use them or buy them. But again, just like everything else, if you take away my food, I'm going to learn how to cook on my own. And the Chinese are cooking. The USCC recently warned that China's open source AI momentum is becoming a serious challenge with Chinese labs narrowing gaps with the top Western models. And that suggests the next phase of competition is not just about who has the best chip. You don't always have to have the best stuff. It's about who can build the most durable ecosystem under geopolitical stress. And for the rest of Asia, this matters because the region may increasingly face two AI supply worlds. One ecosystem will remain centered on US chips, US cloud providers, and Western model companies to the extent that they keep outperforming the Chinese ones, right? But the other will increasingly be shaped by Chinese chips, Chinese open source models, and Chinese deployment platforms. Zhipu is already looking beyond China, including Southeast Asia, even while China remains its core market. And that means this is not just a domestic Chinese industrial story. It could become a regional influence story, especially in price-sensitive markets that care more about deployable artificial intelligence than about using the most prestigious frontier stack. I'm telling you, in Southeast Asia, where we live, the likelihood that as these Huawei chips or Chinese chips in general just start getting closer and closer in performance, but much more reasonable in cost than NVIDIA's chips, and I will say this too, I'm going to use Huawei as a proxy for Chinese chip makers, right? Because there will be more of them. Again, if there's a gap in the market, other companies will come in to fill that gap. It's going to put pressure on NVIDIA's pricing as well. It just is, almost by definition. So what's the big thought here, at least for me? Well, China's domestic AI stack is becoming the story because it changes the frame for everything that's taking place in the artificial intelligence world. For years, the debate was whether export controls would slow China down, and to a certain extent it did at the top end, right? But more importantly, the question now is whether those same controls have accelerated a different outcome, a more self-contained, politically aligned, commercially viable, no reliance on anybody else Chinese AI ecosystem. And on the evidence of the last several weeks, the answer is increasingly, yeah, that's what it seems like, right? Zhipu's numbers, Huawei's customer traction, DeepSeek's hardware alignment and rewriting of some of their code so that it works on Huawei chips as opposed to NVIDIA's chips. And NVIDIA is like collapsing or once near monopoly, to say that 10 times fast, in China, all point in the same direction. And remember, the directionality is the most important point here. This is not the story of China catching up everywhere all at once, everything everywhere all at once. Didn't even see the movie. Probably should have. But it is the story of China making sure it no longer needs the global ecosystem, the global system, the US system in quite the same way. And that may turn out to be the more consequential shift. Okay, let's welcome our guests now. Vijay, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us today. We wanted to have you on because we wanted to get a sense for how technology leaders are thinking about AI infrastructure and the practical challenges of integrating these systems into real-world operations. But before we do that, just tell us a little bit about Humble Code, please.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me. So we are a full stack orchestration platform. So where basically customers build all the way from websites to online stores to booking engines to simple to complex workflows built using Humble Code. And we have been erstwhile no-code platform, but since last year we have converted our platform into a generative AI platform.
Got it. Okay. Let's talk about artificial intelligence. In your experience and in your team's experience, how are businesses in Asia approaching AI adoption? And where are like some of the biggest gaps between the executives saying, we want to do this thing, and like the operational reality of actually being able to do that or being able to implement it?
Okay, that's kind of a good question, and I think everybody in the industry is so confused with all the hype which is happening around AI.
Feels like it.
Yeah, so I have seen in a lot of your shows also, like naming the agents and agents talking to each other,
Yeah.
which we found out to be far from the reality at this stage.
Go ahead.
So fundamentally, Michael, there is a there is a if you go two steps behind. So from our understanding on this complete technology, so there is a I think this particular invention, the transformer model, which came, and all the LLMs happened after that.
Yep.
So basically, what this invention says is it is a probabilistic model. It is not a deterministic model. So no matter whatever kind of use cases you're trying to build and orchestrate or automate or do an agentic AI layer on top of it, so still the part of the core science has not changed as far as we know. So you are only going to get a probabilistic results, and it's not going to be a factual or a deterministic output from these model anytime soon. There could be this could be achievable, but somewhere in the future, if there is another scientific revolution which comes along the way and the transformer model works on a much more accurate basis, so the output could be more realistic compared to probabilistic as of now. And if you talk about the overall industry,
Yep.
so even going back in our experience, if you see 2023-24, it was more on an experimental basis because we were trying to test out what works and what doesn't work. And a lot of things didn't work for us initially when ChatGPT came. They released quite a few number of models, and there were developer APIs, and we tried to test and fine tune kind of a thing. And we wasted a lot of resources, be it from the manpower side or even be it paying these model companies.
Interesting.
And that we had plenty of issues, like the token restrictions and the costing of the model itself and all of that. So slowly we evolved, and somewhere in the beginning of 2025, so we kind of thought, okay, why don't we give another try, when there's a new models like Gemini and so many other models came.
Anthropic and all these other models. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So we went in, so we kind of got a good understanding within our technical department in the first 2 years. And then we exactly knew what we wanted to do with AI. So there were no more days saying that what could be done. It's a very hypothetical thing. Company can do everything. People are talking about, agents as something uh, came from space,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. So
So
go ahead.
yeah, please go ahead.
No, so I want to talk about the agents. I want to get to that in a second. But more importantly, again, because I do think there is a little bit of a disconnect between, and I want to make sure that I get you to answer this question as well. I'm so glad you pointed out this idea that these LLMs are probabilistic models and they're not deterministic, right? And I guess the one thing I would want to ask you is, do you think most people even know that? Or do you think they're expecting it to be deterministic, and when they get an answer that seems factual, that's why they believe it? Because they believe it's deterministic as opposed to probabilistic, where it's going like, the highest probability is that this is the case, but it may not be. Do you know what I mean? Do you think people actually understand this or not? Particularly at like the senior executive level.
Most of them, they don't understand, Michael.
They don't even know that that's a choice, though. Do you know what I mean? Yeah? Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, some of them understand. I mean, but to go to the core of the technology, whenever they're taking a business case internally to execute,
Yep.
what is happening is it's very it is still lying in the outer area. They have not gone into the core of the basic technology itself. And so I will give you a simple example.
Please.
So before I just got into this conversation,
Yep.
so I opened a couple of tabs. One is on ChatGPT and another one is on Gemini.
Okay.
So I asked, what sport does Michael Waits play or interested in? So I got two different answers.
Tell
So
me-
ChatGPT came,
tell me this is great.
ChatGPT came out and said, there are no public information about any sport being played by Michael Waits.
Being played by, yeah? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So that was an answer. So Gemini came back with another different answer. So it said that you aggressively promote F1 on all your shows.
F1.
And
Go ahead.
so you like to run in the mountains or somewhere in the beach, and you like soccer, the American football. So then I went back to Gemini and asked, so I couldn't find this information on ChatGPT, but how did you find? So
Good question.
it says that so we are able to read that data and train our model using the YouTube videos what they have on their platform.
Interesting.
And I asked them why then ChatGPT doesn't have. So they are saying we have the front bench advantage because it's our platform. So we were able to quickly train the model on top of
Got it. So do you want to know the real answer?
it. So
Go ahead.
coming back to what was the question, Michael?
So
Again,
this idea of the difference between probabilistic and deterministic, right? So here's the real question though, right? I get a sense, and I want to get your sense of this too, that a lot of senior executives will read a post on LinkedIn or see somebody say something on X or something like that and just go, that's what we need to implement at our company too. And then they tell the tech team, get an agent that does this thing, that thing, and the other thing. And they try to build it like you said. Look, it took your team, you said 2 years just to experiment with this stuff, just to figure out how it worked until you could get it to do what you wanted to do. So they see the hype in the market and then they try to implement it and it's not working. Is that a fair assessment, you think?
absolutely right, Michael. So I would break that into three phases.
Go for it.
So initially there were a lot of confusion. You would have seen multiple platforms every other day, multiple models coming out, and
Yep.
people trying to understand what it can do or what it cannot do. And then came a phase where a lot of companies did the pilot phase. You would have the famous pilot which went through 2024, even
Right.
2025. So kind of what we could gather from the customers is they could achieve some results. So basically, the technology is powerful and it works. So there is no doubt about this, or we are not going to go back down the line saying that they are going to scrap this implementation strategy or they don't believe the AI at the first place.
Go ahead.
So after the can it work phase passed, so now will it scale and will it make money for me?
Right.
So these are the primary things companies are looking at. So, but when it comes to will it scale, it is like a very large problem we are talking about. You know, the infrastructures, the legacy systems. What do they have? Some of the company might have that advantage if you're a new company, and if you are starting everything new today. I mean, probably your architecture and the tech stack could be quite modern and customizable. But for the legacy companies, you know, already some companies are claiming to be doing a lot of things, but we are not too sure if it is real or it's
Right. Go ahead. I want to give you an example in a second, but please finish the thought. Go ahead.
yeah, but we see that the technology is real. But on the scaling basis, Michael, there are two things. If you see what we are seeing is even the token pricing is not standardized in the market.
Got it.
So what happens is, so when you're building a solution of such a large scale, so the primary thing when you optimize the cloud, the AI is nothing but an addition to the cloud layer. You know, already the cloud was so complicated, the cloud engineering was so complicated, and now the AI going into it adds more complexity to the existing thing. So now what happens? So typically, like the cloud, you know, earlier days, the cloud implementation started happening, and then they found the workloads to be way too expensive, and they changed it to a hybrid cloud, and a lot of things were happening, and it's still happening. It is
Yeah.
not that cloud era is completed.
No, not at all.
Now, now with the AI coming in, so what is happening is it is just not about how we can implement, but whether that solution is practically monetizable. You know, you should not be paying hundreds of $1,000s to the model companies, and you derive a little ROI out of that whole use case.
What is the trade-off again? Because you said this is super interesting, right? That the token pricing is not standardized, right? But if you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on the model stuff, what's the balance between like I'm going to fire my entire staff that does, you know, thing X and replace it with agentic AI? But the agentic AI, two things come to mind. One is it's not cheap. To be fair, it's not free for sure. But second of all, it's not autonomous, I think, in the same way that people think. And I want to have this part of the conversation with everybody that talks about this. You have employees, right? Are your
Yes.
employees themselves autonomous, or don't they come to you sometimes and they just go, oh, Vijay, I want to do this thing, this new thing, but I don't know if I should do it or if we can do it. Like they're not autonomous either. Do you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So how do you square all
Yes.
this stuff?
So we are not even talking about autonomous thing here, Michael.
Go ahead.
So we are completely against autonomous. Like I said, the fundamental we go back was the probabilistic versus the deterministic model.
Yep.
So that is where the buck stops. And we are not talking about reducing the team size and all of that. If you see,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, internally when we converted the platform from no code to the AI, generative AI platform, so what it did was it helped our teams, instead of doing some heavy lift and shift jobs, to be more automated, conversational kind of a thing. But over a period, what we found is basically you definitely need humans in the loop, because
Completely.
building a complex software architecture, no matter what, so the AI can't do by itself. Because there is another analogy in one of the videos I would like to share also. So basically, when we talk about the transformer model, Michael, so
Mm.
what happens is there is no intelligence as such. There is no intelligence in the AI model. So basically, it predicts the next word. That's how the transformer model works.
Yep.
And there is all this context and MCP and the attention, how you refine that particular context to give a very closest output. So that is what is happening. So even when we had a conversation with some of the other companies where they said they are running this AI model on their proprietary data. They have the RAG and MCP, and they're running it on their own data. But even then, so the data has to run through the model, the LLM model. So what happens is, again, the actual factual data becomes a probabilistic when it comes through the LLM. So, for example, you have a mortgage PDF in your system,
Yep.
which is very real, and it's a real document, authenticated document in your side.
Yep.
But when you want to read that through the LLM, what happens is the actual my document might have mistaken when it is reading through your system.
Why?
Because that's the pace of the large language model. So what happens is, that's why uh, I could see in some of your discussions, so you always have this question of why there is consistent answers are not coming again and again, right?
Yep.
So what happens when this whole the process happens in the back end? So it depends on the same query. When you query it for the second time, if one of the nodes or neurons they call in the transformer tech, if it slows down, so the kind of output you get at that stage is completely different from the previous stage.
Yeah, it would have to be. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so there are things like this. So what we see is there is nothing we are not in a phase saying that so much employment will go off because of implementing the solution, which is very false according to our observation.
I think so too, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what we feel is the technology is real and it is implementable. And again, based on the scale of scale of the project, again, it varies. If we are talking about SMEs, it's a different thing. And if you're talking about enterprise, it's a whole lot of different things.
Yeah, yeah.
We see we are at least 2 to 3 years far away from.
Can I ask you this too? Because you mentioned the word infrastructure, right? And you also hinted at this idea of, like, if you're a newer company, you may be running a newer technology stack just in general, right? If you're an enterprise or an incumbent company, you may have some legacy stuff inside of your sort of system architecture. What do you think is like the optimal way to run AI infrastructure so that it actually can scale inside some of these companies, whether it's an SME or even a large enterprise? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. So this is a good question.
Mm.
So we'll have to go back to the cloud era.
Go for it.
So if you see, in our experience, a very senior cloud engineer who's worked with AWS for 10, 15 years,
Yeah.
he could optimize a cloud which is costing $15,000 a month. He can reduce that to somewhere 5,000, 4,000.
Okay.
If you know how to orchestrate the entire cloud to do it in a very optimal way. So this AI implementation exactly goes, like I said, it has added one more layer onto the cloud implementation as of now. So why I'm saying it is a good thing for the new companies which are venturing now rather than the legacy system,
Mm.
because the legacy systems are too large, like no matter what fancy technology language we talk, changing the direction of that and implementing the AI just write on the existing technology is not as easy as it sounds,
No. Can I just jump in for a second? Like, I think about one of the companies where I worked, a global bank that was literally, and I'm not going to say the name of the company, but I think it'll be obvious from what I say now. But it was just like an accumulation and an amalgamation of like literally hundreds of companies. And the internal technology stack was such a mess that I can imagine like what you're saying here is this is a large institutional bank, right? It's globally known brand. Everybody, you see their logo everywhere. But I imagine if you're implementing AI inside of this company, it could be a complete nightmare because of all the things you just mentioned. Yeah?
exactly.
Yeah, I just think it would be a complete nightmare. Sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, no, no. These are the couple of things. If it's a new company, I mean, the technology stack, what they will be implementing
Yeah,
at the current state of affairs could give an advantage. I will point you to a couple of simple examples. So
please.
when the cloud and the mobile came,
Yep.
so who are the few companies who succeeded? It was Airbnb, Grab, Uber. So these were the company who fully built grounds up on that cloud and mobile and all the cloud technologies. And if you see, that has gone on to be the business uh, thing on its own. We didn't have any kind such businesses before the cloud happened and mobile happened.
Yeah.
So likewise, there will be few companies in this AI revolution. It could be completely AI native, but it's very hard to predict. Like what kind of companies will come in what kind of a domain at this stage.
How do you guys think about governance? Do you know what I mean? When you're implementing all this new AI technology, how do you think about governance and like how do you try to explain to the people with whom you're working like why governance is so important? And I guess the second thing is how about like system interoperability as well, right? And again, like I told you for this big bank where I was working, some of these systems I don't even know how they spoke to each other. So how do you think about that stuff?
Okay, so not much has changed from your days.
I'm
To be
sure.
fair. Not much has changed.
I'm sure.
So it went on from a simple XML integration, CSV integration, and then the APIs came into play. There are a lot of complex APIs where two systems can talk. But again, if you see, if it has changed the entire integration landscape, we would say it has improved a little bit, but it doesn't cuts across all these multiple systems and talk and take decisions. That building that itself is like a building a system on its own.
Yeah.
So when it comes to governance and all the security and all of these parts, so one advantage internally when we talk about our platform, so we didn't go through the general coding route. So if you see, there are a lot of vibe coding companies which came in the last 2 years.
Right.
So you just type in something and you have the output. So we call it a black box because software shouldn't be developed in such a way that you just have few sentences and you have the output and then you go in to see what needs to be changed. So that might take much longer than the actual building phase itself.
Exactly. Go ahead.
So in a typical SDLC. So since we were a no-code platform earlier, so we had this hundreds of pre-built components which were already available in the platform. So what happened was some of the use cases like websites and online stores and booking engines. So these were kind of simple use cases, I would say. The solo entrepreneurs or even the people from operations team can just log in and do everything. But when it comes to a little bit of complex workflows, there is a part of business logic which needs to be written. So we always found internally, the users were not so comfortable like working with the websites or online store. So we kind of, when this generative AI came, so we could re-architect the whole thing, and that could be done conversationally. We saw a complete advantage internally. And another point to your question, how do we build the guardrails? So our platform was there for a long time, and whatever applications you generate through the platforms. So what happens is all the infrastructure, all the way to the back end, how your databases are stored, how your front end files are stored, and how the APIs are being configured. Everything is already available, Michael. So we are not building anything new on that front.
Got it.
So for us, it became quite a lot easier compared to another kind of building individual guardrails for complex systems.
Can I ask you this too? When you're working with some of your clients, right? Where do you think they are maybe underestimating just some of the internal human and maybe just like organizational challenges of adopting AI, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. So again, there is a. I would make a differentiation between SMEs and enterprise.
Yeah, fair enough. Go
So
ahead.
SMEs are a lot more open. We have seen because they are not too much worried about security and guardrails. I'm not saying it shouldn't be that way, but
Yeah, yeah.
they are not. So they are like they are open to experimenting a lot of new technologies. But what happens is when you go to a upper SME or enterprise, the basic challenge what we see it's an enterprise strategy. The people there would be head of a global sitting somewhere and all the regional offices. So implementing the decision to implement the technology itself, it practically. It's not an easy call to change everything. But at the same time, if you see the operational people inside, so they are willing to experiment this. Now, what is happening is a lot of things are being outside their corporate tools. Individuals are using all the chat GPTs and Gemini outside their work time, to do some work stuff.
Yep.
But they really want this to be implemented within the organization. They have from some of the conversation, there are some simple tools which are already there in the corporates to summarize the decks and generating text, but they have not gone beyond that.
Got it. Can I ask you this too? And then I'll let you go. You keep making this dichotomy between how SMEs are doing this and how large institutions are doing it, large enterprises are doing it as well. Do you think there's some aspect to this technological implementation that levels the playing field a little bit between like what an SME can accomplish now and what an enterprise can accomplish? And to be fair, if, as you suggest, the SMEs are not better at it, but just more likely to experiment with stuff, then maybe they can, in some cases, jump ahead because they can implement this technology faster and easier?
Yes, that's absolutely possible. So, another one I wanted to discuss is, so if you see this entire AI landscape, is it is more advantageous for the SMEs rather than the large enterprises, Michael. So, because in our understanding, what we feel is now these small mid-level companies can go aggressively against the large enterprise companies
Yeah,
because having the advantage of exploring this technology or being nimble to have these changes in their thing, so they can compete quite well with the large companies. But at the same time, large companies are not going to leave it as such and stay idle, so they are
true.
also going to fight back. But the thing is, their implementation cycle is going to be much longer compared to the SMEs or individuals, how they are going to adopt this tool.
Yeah, it feels like it. Okay. Um, Look, I really want to thank you for coming and doing this today, Vijay. We really appreciate your time. We'll have to have you back when the conversation needs to continue. Thank you again for doing this today.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Okay, AJ, thank you so much for joining us today. We wanted to have you on because we want to have you discuss with us how technology companies are navigating AI adoption and what kind of practical use cases are actually emerging. But before we do that, just tell people a little bit more about Jazz.
Sure. So we, as an organization, we're about 3, 4, 5 years old, but the journey of Jazz began about 2, 3 years ago so our entire origin started from payments and fintech.
Got it.
In Southeast Asia, obviously, you very quickly learn that if you're operating in a payment space, you still have to integrate with an accounting platform, you still have to integrate with a finance stack. But in Asia, there was no champion, unlike the US where there's QuickBooks. In Asia, there wasn't really a champion. So for us, trying to solve payments felt like it was a bit of a, first world problem that we were trying to solve in a emerging economy.
Yeah.
So we felt like we did something a bit stickier, trying to get to the roots of the problems that the businesses face, the small, medium businesses that we were serving. So we decided to build an accounting module. Now, it was just an idea to build like a small little module that would serve the entire payments infrastructure.
Right.
As any ambition goes south, this became the core flagship of the company. It was such a huge problem statement. We learned so much along the way. So the small module ended up overtaking the entire platform, became the core of the company. And today, that's kind of how we came to it. Like, it was just a journey of like learning that, in Southeast Asia, payments as a problem statement, fintech as a problem statement was there, but something more fundamental just needed to be solved first. So that's kind of how Jazz was born. We started just to connect the dots, and in the end, it became the whole narrative of the organization.
I like it. So you said the organization itself is like 4 or 5 years old, but this AI stuff or the accounting thing has been going on for a couple of years. But in your experience dealing with either enterprises or even with SMEs, how are they approaching? Because there's just so much hype in the market, right, about artificial intelligence. So
Yep.
how are they approaching adopting this? And I mean, I just finished talking to somebody who said like they experimented for 2 years before they actually implemented anything. Yeah, that's a real thing. So what is the gap between the experimentational and like the real operational deployment?
That's a super good question. So I think we were very lucky when we started building Jazz. It was exactly around the same time that OpenAI dropped the GPT model. So when we started building the core platform, we built it with the fundamentals of a software, of a ledger, all of that in place, not just a full sort of AI solution, right? So AI came to us as almost a, like a on the hindsight of it all when we saw the first GPT model. So we had the benefit of building AI into a very, very core foundational infrastructure already, which I think is super important because if you try to build an AI only solution, I think it's a bit of a rat race, right? Like you're forever chasing the next model, the next solution, the next possible technology, the next possible principle. So it's very, very difficult. So we had the benefit of having the full ledger, the full software experience, and then the AI agents sort of stacked on top of it. So even in the way we build the organization, we sort of operate along 3 vectors: ledger, software, agents. That's how we build everything we do in the organization today. That's, in fact, the ultimate product roadmap's ledger software agents. Now, when we go to market and we try to help these small, medium businesses deploy all of these, right? I think it's very easy for us to bring the ledger and the software to market, but there are obviously friction points in bringing the agents to market. Now, there are 2 different reasons for it. One, I think we operate in a domain that's highly sensitive. Finance, accounting, it's compliance, it's numbers, there's a lot of personal information. There's a lot of,
It's got to be right.
fear and concept. Exactly. It's got to be right. So precision is super important. That's one. And the second is also the privacy of it all, right? Like you don't want this data going somewhere where, someone else might have access. Now, in markets like Singapore, I think there is a certain amount of tax compliance built into the population already. But in other markets, tax compliance is still a bit of a, what's the right word? A bit of a slippery slope. People are still
It's gray.
figuring out what, it's gray,
It's
right?
gray.
And if it's gray, you kind of don't want everything precise. So it's this really weird dichotomy of, trying to solve, the region's most painful problem with what is supposed to be like a super machine, but people don't necessarily want to use it or want it solved fully yet.
So what was it like back in 2023 when you first saw the transformer models and you thought, because you were already building like the accounting thing, that was going to be core. And you're right. I think you actually make a really good point. If you try to build what you were building starting today, there is this sort of tendency to just be like, it's got to be AI first, AI native, AI everything. 100%. And you're right. Then you're just running up a hill that like is never going to end. But 100%. What was the epiphany what was it? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think you're so right. And I feel like, I don't even want to take credit for it because if I was a founder that started today, I think I'd fall right into that trap just because the amount of funding you raise, the whole narrative for you is like to move so fast and, you're just in this mindset, right? So it's almost really lucky that we were just born exactly the same time where, AI was just not good enough to be an AI only company. So we had to force ourselves to do the hard fucking stuff. Sorry, hard stuff. And then the agents came later. But yes, to your point, like I think if we were to think about our journey today, a lot of it has been split into 2 dimensions. I think the first year was a lot of research and, a lot of, maybe research is not the right word, a lot of like figuring stuff out. Like we were doing a lot of experiments, a lot of POC. We are very lucky. Google had an accelerator a couple of years ago, Google AI First Accelerator. It was the inaugural one, the first one that they rolled out in the region. We were part of the first batch in Singapore.
Good for you. Go ahead.
It was in Singapore as well. Yeah, so we were part of that first batch. And, that to us was like, wow, eye-opening. You go into these sessions, you learn how to spin up GPUs in like Las Vegas and you figure out how to, deploy a model there. You learn about some of these technologies which back then were very new, like open graphs and LangChain and stuff like that. That was just coming out. So this was a couple of years ago, and we were just getting our hands on all of these technology. And this was before the era of like Claude Code or Codex, where learning meant actually having to study the theory and try to figure out the code yourself, right? And it was a huge learning journey for us. A lot of POCs, a lot of hands-on. And then the second year after, I think we had a very good idea. I think the team internally were very convinced on where this was going. All of us, it was sort of like, rowing in the same direction. And in the second year, we actually filed a patent in Singapore. And we had a patent published by the end of the year. So like within the order of 1 year, we had a patent published for, a system and method for AI agents in accounting, which the goal was really to imagine this future where accounting was done, by AI agents, both system and method, right?
Yeah.
So the second year was really a lot of theory going into practice. And then by the second year, later half of the year, we already had agents in production. Now, some of these were chat-based agents, some of these were email-based agents. There were different orchestration mechanisms behind each of these, but there were already, and till today, those exist. There were and there are already agents in production that we had built about around the 2024 late mark, roughly. That's kind of when I would say we had our first usable AI technology that the mass market could effectively use.
I want to make sure that my memory is good enough, but I think you said there were three components here to the stuff you're building: ledger, software, and then agents. Yeah,
Agents, exactly.
and that the first two, the ledger and the software, is pretty easy to sell to people because it's things that they understand, right?
Exactly.
But when it comes to the agentic stuff, even if it's not, because we can talk about autonomy as long as you want, right? I'm not a big believer in this, and I say this on every kind of recording that I do now because I want to be very clear about it. You have employees that aren't 100% autonomous. Humans.
Yeah.
You wouldn't give them
Yes.
100% autonomy. They're always going to come to you at some point and go,
Yep.
AJ, should we do this thing?
Yep.
Right? So
Yep.
the agentic AI is probably going to live in the same world, right? Because they're not going to know everything either, regardless of
Yep.
their access. But what is it like convincing, whether it's an SME or even an enterprise client, to say like, there's a spot inside your workflow where actually having some agentic AI is actually really important and it's going to make you more efficient. What is that sales? Because it's kind of like selling it to them, right? What is
Yeah.
that sales like, and what is their response normally over time?
I wish I could answer that like credibly because we have like AI in our domain. We have a patent. We're the only ones that have a patent out here.
Yep.
And yet when we go to market today, we don't sell AI. Like we never actually
Really?
take AI to market. No, because exactly as you said, it's a lot easier to sell the ledger and the software layer because it's understood. It's well governed. They have internal processes that wrap around it. Selling AI is almost a shot in the foot to some degree because you're trying to go in
they
and
can still use it, but you're not. So you're not. But you're just not like.
exactly.
I got it.
We
So
don't
it's
we
part
don't
of the
blow a
product
horn. We
suite.
don't blow the horn about it. Exactly.
Got it. That's smart,
Exactly.
actually. Yeah.
Exactly. In a way, so you see this adoption very gradually. People start asking you questions like, "Hey, how do I use this in Claude? Hey, how do I send this email? Hey, there's a bug here." And then you're like, "Okay, people are using it." And we don't talk about it. We don't advertise it. We mention it in a demo like very briefly,
I like
like
this.
of a 20, 30-minute demo, the AI portion is like max 5 minutes, 4 minutes. Like that's it, But to answer your question on how it's being used and the amount of autonomy, I think one of the biggest things we've seen in Southeast Asia, and this is because the cost of labor is still very low in this region. Even in Singapore, a lot of the the low cost labor is done in the Philippines, is done in regional markets. So the cost of labor is generally very low. So there is a huge mindset around here, like, hey, why do I want to pay more for AI when my employees can just do it anyway? Like they're paid $3, $4, $5, $6, $7 an hour. Like why do I
Right.
need
The
to move that?
The tokens are more expensive than that.
Exactly. The tokens are still more expensive than that. And one of the biggest things you hear all the time is even if I save all this, even if I gain all this labor productivity, it's not like I can cut half of my employee and let them go home early. I still have to pay them a full salary, so they might as well do it. So
Do stuff, yeah.
I think, I think on aggregate over long term, the labor productivity that comes out of AI, well, you could argue two schools that everyone's jobs get displaced, or you could see the economy, on aggregate getting more productive. Either or happens. But I think in the short term, the big challenge is that, look, even if you get very productive, even if the labor force gets very productive or within a company, how do you generate enough demand such that the supply can be used more effectively,
Yeah.
right? If you're an accounting firm and you have a team of bookkeepers and you wire AI through your entire organization, maybe you get to save like 20, 30% time spent. But now the 20, 30% time spent, do you really have demand that's coming in to fill it up that you can monetize and make revenue? Like, if the answer is no, then why pay more for AI, right? So there is this short-term, I think, lag effect between supply freeing up, meaning labor cost and labor availability freeing up, and then demand coming in. And no one's able to price that right now. So we're in this gap where the cost of value of AI is just like almost an invisible layer out in Southeast Asia because the cost of labor is just too low here.
There's so much nonsensical conversation around AI replacing your job, whatever your job is, that it's actually kind of refreshing to hear somebody say what you just said, because that's what I believe. And you've actually been able to say it in a way that's way more eloquent than I could say it. My point is that like every historical invention technologically has made humans' lives better, not worse, and has not caused this sort of scaremongering style of job losses. And sometimes maybe today that even people that are cutting jobs aren't cutting them because of AI, but they're just using it as kind of like a convenient excuse, like maybe
No,
we just don't have the
100%.
right people kind of thing. So I really appreciate the fact that you did this or that you said this. Can you talk a little bit more about? I know you said when you go out to sell your product that you're not talking about the AI in particular, but what does it actually look like? Do you know what I mean? What does useful AI look
Yeah.
like in finance and accounting? Where, like you said, I like the word precision. It's got to be precise and it's got to be right. Because again,
Yeah.
if I'm an accountant or a controller inside of Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs and I make a mistake, I have a problem, regardless of whether
Yeah.
I'm using tech or not using tech. Yeah. So what does it look like that's
Yeah.
actually useful?
No, that's a very good question. I think I'd break that up into like three parts, right? So I think one, there is the medium. So uh, even in the AI that we build, or the tool, the capabilities we bring to market, we think about them in almost two categories, like what is actually useful and what is vanity. Now,
Yeah.
vanity might sound silly, but vanity is actually important because vanity gets you through a demo. Vanity gets you through events. Vanity gets you through show and tell,
Yeah.
which sometimes you need to tell that story, right?
Yep.
So the vanity stuff, which I think largely in the world of finance and accounting, I think in my view, having a chat-based LLM trying to communicate with it to do accounting and finance is completely absurd. Like if you're letting a large language model do compute on numbers, on financials, on precisions, on things that cannot afford to be more than 0.001 cent off, if not balance doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I think it's almost ridiculous or absurd to try to use a large language model to generate all of that, right? So there are vanity things that we have as front-facing tools and capabilities that we use in events and stuff, but behind the scenes, I think what's really important is the orchestration engine. So let me try to break that down in simpler form. So when you say, if you use any of Jazz's agents and you go in and you say, hey, can you generate the P&L? Can you run analysis on this anomalous invoices? Now, what the LLM is doing, or what the agent orchestration framework is doing, is it's understanding your intent and it's calling a bunch of APIs at the back, which then run the algorithms on our infrastructure, our cloud, then take that results, return that results back to the agent, to another agent that then analyzes it and presents it back to the user. But at no point does the agent framework actually do compute, actually try to understand, what your data is, actually try to do,
Got it.
complex math or complex. So it is very, very important to try and move as much of the operation as deterministically as possible into an infrastructure that does deterministic math, deterministic operations, and keep only the subjective pieces of translation, analysis, human intent understanding to the agent framework, right? So if you were to go to any of our agencies, you give me the P&L for 2024, and you were to do that, and you go to the actual UI, the software, and you press, P&L, and you try to look at it, it's going to give you the exact same number down to the last decimal because the agent is just invoking the same API or the same call that powers that UI layer as well.
Right. So it's not using a large language model to run into the math
No.
associated
No.
with it. It's just doing it. Do you want to talk, because you use the word deterministic.
Yep.
Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you actually have to explain to people the difference between like the fact that LLMs themselves are not deterministic, which is why sometimes you get different answers, but they're more probabilistic, so that sometimes stuff gets slightly convoluted? Do you find yourself in a situation where you need to explain that to people as well?
We try, instead of, so it comes up, and the way we try to explain it is to actually show them. We say, hey, look, if you ask for a data point and with the LLM, with the agent, that same data point is exact same value, the exact same number shows up on the UI. So we try to show them that no matter how many times you do this, it's always going to be deterministic because the LLM is not guessing.
Exactly.
So we try to tell them it's not a guessing game. It's just a interpretation of what you need and then giving you what you need in a different form factor. We try to drive that for them as much as we can. I think it sticks. I hope it sticks.
Hopefully it is sticking. So
Yes.
as more and more agents like kind of go out into the world, you mentioned this before, right? Like, because it's financial data, whether it's accounting or whether it's finance, you don't want that data escaping like into places where other people shouldn't see it. And actually there are stories, I want to remember the exact details of this, where somebody wanted to know, somebody in department A wanted to know like the list of customers and what they were paying in like department B, but they didn't have permissions for it. But they figured out a way to actually have them, without saying exactly what they were paying, put them in order. So they didn't have access to,
smart.
do you know what I mean? So it could go in and it couldn't get the numbers back, but it got the order back. So it gave them some sense of like, okay, these are the high paying customers, these are the middle, these are the low paying customers, and gave them a sense knowing like what pricing was like, what the actual prices were. So what are the risks out there as more and more stuff gets kind of agent enabled? What are some of the risks out there? You know, what is the permission that's supposed to go on, and what is the governance around this stuff that has to happen?
Yeah, no, that's another thing we obsess over. So we call this data crossover, where
Okay.
one party is not allowed to get data of another party, or for some reason, they have access levels that should not reach that level of data. We fire all our requests through an authentication layer. So there's both an authorization and authentication layer. We every request that you make, we make sure that your particular user profile has the access to that data level. If not, the API call fails. Now, this goes back to the earlier point when I said that the LLM actually, honestly, isn't very smart. It's not doing a lot of work. It's just translating your request from one language to another.
Yeah.
And it's just making an API call. Now, if it makes an API call for, let's say, give me the list of suppliers sorted by in ascending order of volume, that API call will fail. Now, on our side, that API call will fail because deterministically, we've already wired into the API to say, hey, this user does not have the permissions necessary to make that call. So there is no information that the LLM can get, because the only way it gets information is by making API calls.
Right.
And all those API calls are determined purely in code. Like, code has been written with authentication, authorization, making sure that information stays, as it should within the platform. So I think we got a little bit lucky there in the way we designed our entire agent, which goes back to the start of the conversation. I think, if you build a platform today with pure AI mindset, I
Yeah.
think you tend to overlook these things because you don't think about customer access. And,
Yeah.
like if you're in the sales module, do you have access for preparer, member, individual? And you don't think that deep. But if you were to have built software and ledger first, I think you're forced to have built that deep, because when someone logs in, it's very obvious that you have access to this module and you don't have access to this module. So we just had to ride on that infrastructure that we already built. So again, which is a little bit lucky in the way we got into this whole thing.
Yeah, in a way, the way you got into it is actually kind of fortunate, right? I don't like to use the word lucky, but kind of
Yes.
fortunate, right? Because you already had to build in all of these permissions, all of these controls. You had to think about it
Correct.
actually in a way that was harder, because you weren't
Correct.
reliant on the AI to actually do all that work for you.
Correct.
So then you're like, oh, now let's apply the AI to these processes that we already have that are
Exactly.
hopefully really robust. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So when
Go
we
ahead.
talk about AI, we actually think of AI as almost a new form factor, like a new interface. We don't think of AI as a new employee or as a new capability or solution. We think of it as a new form factor. Like, you had, for a long time it was web, then came mobile, right? So now everybody is web, everybody is mobile, and now AI to us is just another form factor. You have this slightly more autonomous, or significantly more autonomous, significantly more intelligent interface where you can then command and complete the same operations, but it's just another interface. The back end of it, the engine behind all of that still has to be deterministic as much as maximally possible.
Yeah, for sure, particularly in finance and accounting. Are your customers set up in a way that their technology infrastructure is sufficient to run the
Very
stuff
good
that,
question.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think right now, because we work largely with small, medium businesses, and we generally only take on like enterprise projects at very selective basis. But when you work with small, medium businesses, I think you kind of bear the burden of the infrastructure.
Yeah,
Right?
that's what I mean.
Yeah. So we have to bear the burden. So effectively, if you want to run an agent operation, the assumption here is that we are running it for you. So very recently, we had Jazz. So Jazz is now public on Claude. Like if you go to Claude and you go to the connectors, you will see Jazz Accounting as one of the connectors there.
Is it? Okay.
So, but one of the prerequisites for this is that these businesses or these business owners or finance admins or accountants need to have a Claude subscription. Now, in Singapore, I think that's going to be pretty high. But if you step out to markets like Philippines and the region, Indonesia, it's very unlikely to have Claude subscriptions, right? So how do you get them to use Claude with Jazz? How do you
Yeah.
get them to use Claude Code? How do you get it? It's almost impossible. So there is sort of that infrastructure barrier, whether it's because of access or whether it's because of pricing. I think a bit of both. But where there is that gap, we then have to take on the infrastructure ourselves. We have to host our own capabilities, whether it's our own email orchestration framework, our own chat framework, so that they can then access it at, just as long as they have an internet and some compute,
Right.
they have access to it.
I was going to say, so it removes the necessity for them to run their own, they're running it on your stuff as opposed to running it
Exactly.
on-prem. Yeah, so it makes it
Exactly.
easier. So you
Which is
don't really
expensive
care.
for us, and I don't love it.
Yeah. But I mean, this is the other thing too, right? Now, I was having this conversation earlier. We talked about it a little bit, but maybe address it a little bit more if you don't mind.
Sure.
Particularly when it comes to SMEs, and you're right, because the cost of labor in the region in which we live is reasonable to low. You have to make this balance of, do I even want to have agentic AI just based on, like you just said just now, like all the back end costs are actually, it's not free, right?
Yeah.
So maybe in the US or maybe in these high wage countries, it's different, but out here, like, what does it look like to you? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This balance.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Even us as an organization, right? We have our engineering team, based in mostly in the region, right? Like
Yep.
across the different markets here.
Yep.
We in the US, if you look at posts coming out of the Silicon Valley, you look at X, you see a lot of people spending like tens of thousands of dollars in tokens a month in Cloud Code and Codex, right? Like
Yeah.
that's insane, right? Because the salary there is just the cost of living salaries that completely different here. Out here, we give every engineer like a full Cloud Max or Cloud Pro, whatever the top level of Cloud subscription. But that's enough. That's a couple of $100s, and we're like, okay, that's a bit much, compared as a benchmark of your salary. That's maybe, that's enough for you. But yeah, in the US, it's completely different. So I think that applies not just to programming and building, but I think it applies generally to any usage of technology out here. Like there is always this inherent trade-off between willingness to pay and cost of labor. I don't think it's special for AI. I think it's existed in software. I think Southeast Asia's, software companies, including us, like we went through a very dark time in the early 20s because interest rates started going up and we were like, okay, we have to monetize. And then you realize, okay, the willingness to pay for software is like net zero, near zero in Southeast Asia because labor is just so cheap, right? So I think it's an inherent problem. I don't know if it changes anytime soon. I think obviously the cost to compute, the cost of models are coming down over time. Hopefully that makes a difference, but I think we still see it every day. Which goes back to the point earlier. I find it very hard to go into conversation really, blowing our horn on AI. It's just pointless.
Yeah, I agree.
It's
Look,
pointless.
you make a really good point too. It's not just in the software business. The propensity to pay for almost anything is just so much lower than it
Correct.
is, particularly when it comes to
Correct.
work, because labor is just so cheap. One more thing,
Correct.
and then I'll let you go. I was reading somewhere that Anthropic said that the software that they write internally, so like the next version of
Yeah.
Claude Opus or whatever
Yeah.
it is a lot of it written by Claude itself.
Yeah.
So do you guys
Yeah.
use that internally to develop your own software, and how have you found it?
Yes, I mean that itself has its own conversation of its own, and yes, short answer is phenomenal. Yes, like so, I spend I spent all of my life in finance. I never written a line of code, not even Hello World, like for
I've done
my
that.
whole life, right? I hadn't even done that, and like since last year, I've been deploying code and into production like as if I'm a pianist. Like
Wow.
like it's amazing. It
must blow your mind, yeah?
It is mind blowing. I haven't slept since then, but it's mind blowing.
Go
Right,
ahead.
like it's a beautiful experience.
I know
I
the
think the
feeling.
ability, it gives you so much autonomy. You feel really empowered. Every idea. I mean, I think you get to this point where the only boundary for you is your imagination.
Yeah.
Like what you can imagine, you can execute already. Like any of the models can get you to that point already. So it's really, really powerful feeling. But it's also a little bit scarier because as builders, it's super exciting and intellectually stimulating. But then you think about this, okay, wait a second, if I'm doing this, out there, my clients, my prospects, at some point, they're probably sitting around a table and having the same conversation like, hey, why can't I go out and build, a version of this myself? Why,
Yeah.
why do I have to pay these guys for ledger software or agents? I can probably try to do all of the three, right? Like some super creative CFO, some super creative business owner could sit there and build his own stack, right?
Yeah.
So that's also scary. I think there's, it becomes almost like, it almost becomes like a battle of composers. Like, who is the better symphony orchestrator here? Like,
Right.
is it me or is it going to be one of my clients or a bunch of them? Like, who can outcompose each other in this game of building?
Yeah, look, I think you're right. That's a conversation. It's a much longer conversation for another time.
It
I
is.
really want to thank you for coming and doing this. I really
welcome.
appreciate your time today. We got to have you back.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's it for ATP Insights today. Thank you so much again for joining us. Give us a thumbs up on the video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, and follow us on all of our socials on X, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. Leave comments everywhere. We'd love to get questions from everybody. We love doing Ask Michael Anything in AMA. We're happy to respond to everybody. Again, thank you for doing this. My name is Michael Waits. Bye for now.